Nigeria's Petroleum Industry Bill has finally been passed by both chambers of the National Assembly 13 years since its conception, and the much anticipated bill, which consists of 318 clauses, divests the regulatory powers of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation and approves 3% contribution to the host communities. Well, joining me to unpack this expected impact on Nigeria's oil and gas industry are Kola Karim, he's the Chairman of Shoreline Group. Also joining us is Taiwo Oyedele, Partner and West Africa Tax Leader at PwC Nigeria, and Adeoye Adefulu, Partner at Odujinrin and Adefulu. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Now, I know that I've had conversations with all three of you over the, should I say, years now, on the PIB, as of course it went through the trenches. But I'd like to start with your initial thoughts on the passage of this bill and perhaps key takeaways from the process, 13 years in the making, going through the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th National Assembly. Kola, let me start with you. Initial thoughts on this, the entire process and where we are today.
Thank you very much, Esther. Look, this is fantastic news, not only for Nigeria, but for the oil industry. It's an amazing landmark waiting. Once we get the presidential assent on this, this actually gives a landmark platform for anyone looking in and people operating in the industry to get a better sense of how we can evolve the oil and gas sector. My key takeaway, that's a key major winner, is the host communities 3%. I think this will lay to rest the agitation right across the Niger Delta and giving better evaluation to the future of so many host communities in their participation in every licensed interest onshore, offshore Nigeria. Very, very interesting times.
Well, Taiwo, let's hear your thoughts, your initial thoughts and key takeaways for you, as we've discussed this over the years.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just to say, I'm now the Africa Tax Leader for PwC, no longer just West Africa Tax Leader.
Okay, all right.
So maybe for me, I'll say, this is good, but it's been 20 years late. But they say better late than never. The second issue is maybe it's not Uhuru yet, because we still need to have the harmonization between the House of Representatives and the Senate. And of course, I would say that majority of the provisions of the law made no harmonization. But when it comes to things like how much should you contribute to the host community, there's already a divergence between the House of Rep and the Senate. And once that harmonization happens, then we then hope that the president will give his assent. Of course, one major difference between this bill that has been passed and some of the previous ones, especially in the 8th Assembly, was the fact that the 8th Assembly version was a private member bill, whereas this is an executive bill. So you would expect that the areas of divergence will be limited. So I think in terms of the highlights for me, so I'd like to look beyond the excitement of we now have a bill that is close to becoming a law to say what really does it mean in terms of the attractiveness for investment, given that the world is no longer where it was about 20 years ago when all of this started. So the dynamics are different. How does this play into our context as a country? How does it play into the world and the future of energy? And how effectively will this be able to address the concerns of the Nigerian people?
You're absolutely right, Taiwo. Adeoye, let's hear your initial thoughts or takeaways from this process so far.
Thanks, Esther. It's great to be here and to talk about the Petroleum Industry Bill. I agree with everything that Kola and Taiwo have said. It's been a long time coming. Nonetheless, even though the bill has taken this long and it's finally here, I know that many people will say, look, it's better we have a bill than we don't have a bill. And there is a lot of sense in that. But the proof of the success or otherwise of this bill is going to be really how much investment this bill is going to be in. And Taiwo talked about the issue of energy transition. And that has truly been accentuated in the last sort of 1.5 years or so. we're not living in the same world, and oil is still going to be relevant in the next 20, maybe even 30 years. But the relevance of oil, it's not going to be at the same rate. And so what does this bill talk to us about? Expediting our oil resources so that we don't have stranded investments. What does it say about making sure that we actually have use of our oil locally and within the African community, because we're not going to be able to export the oil into the traditional markets that we have exported into.
All right.
How does it address the security issues, and how does it address the IOCs who have said that we are transitioning out of Nigeria?
Absolutely, Adeoye. That's why we're going to go into all that nitty-gritty now. Now, for the Petroleum Industry Bill, there are three key areas that it focuses on. The more controlled taxation, or should I say simplifying taxation or taxes and royalties for oil companies operating in the country, a better distribution of wealth, and that's where the host, the equity, 3% equity fund for the host communities, and of course, transforming the NNPC into a commercial entity, a company. Taiwo, let me start with you. I'd like you to take us through, the taxation aspect of this. We are expecting to see it simplified taxes and royalties for all companies operating in the country. What does that mean? What should we expect in terms of how we break this down?
Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the issues that people like us and peers in the industry have debated and discussed over the years have been the fiscal provisions in the sector. So in large parts, because many of them were out of date, many of them were, I would say, provisions of the law at the time that Nigeria didn't fully understand the sector. So you found some incentives were overly generous. You find a lot of, I would say, dichotomy between how you treat one investment versus the other, even though it's in the same sector, and so on and so forth. So the PIB, as passed by the National Assembly, provides better clarity and more certainty, which is good. In terms of the tax rate, I think you need to work out the effective tax rate to know whether the taxes are lower or higher. What most people would do is to focus on the headline rate. You had up to 85% before, but now you're going to have a hydrocarbon tax, and then you have a company's income tax. Company income tax is 30%. The hydrocarbon tax will range between 5% to 42.5%, depending on whether it's a deep offshore, whether it's shallow water, whether it's onshore, and so on and so forth. But there are a few provisions that I thought could have been, better treated. For example, there's a requirement for oil companies to get the approval of the commission established under the bill before you can get deduction for interest on loans. And I think that is completely unnecessary because you already have the tax authority, the FRS, and we have the transfer pricing regulation that provides guidelines as to how that should be treated. So I believe that is something that could have been done, in a better way. But overall, I'll say to the extent that it provides better clarity and more certainty, it is indeed an improvement.
Absolutely. Kola, let me come to you. Let's talk about the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, which is to become a limited liability company. Now we understand to focus primarily on commercial activities. Talk to us about how this is going to work, and of course, what happens to those agencies under the NNPC?
Look, I think the good thing is once the final iteration of this bill has passed, is signed, then the proper understudy and the clarity on the operational methodology is going to come into light. But the headline is, as a limited liability company, the national oil company will start being in conformity of global norms, where in comparison to other national oil companies that are more customer, client, and relationship focused. And unpacking this, it will give NNPC that bite and a closer relationship with the actual operators of assets that are in partnership with NNPC. And this in itself would energize and further create that interest from practitioners like ourselves, and keeping away all the blockages in the system and the slowdown in the system in getting approvals and relevant positioning on projects. This is good. One key area that we need to look at, that we need to study properly, is who and how are the people going to staff this new companies, how they're going to be appointed, because competence is also critical in making sure we have the right people in the right places as the main drivers of this new limited
Kola, if
liability.
I could just come in here, apologies for interrupting. What we're hearing is that the current employees are actually just going to be moved to the new company, and then it's going to be business as usual from there.
Baby, you see, again, you can't, sometimes you can fight the war and lose the whole battle. But the reality is this: we need to make sure we have competent hands that are in the driver's seat to deliver to the norms of the PIB. And that's key critical. So even if we're going to have the same people, I believe there's still got to be a lot of training of managers in place that will be the drivers of these entities, so to make sure government's aim and objectives is achieved according to the PIB.
Okay, Adeoye, let me bring you in here. Let's talk about, under the better distribution of wealth, that 3% equity to go to the host community. There was an argument for 10%. The House, the Joint Committee on Petroleum decided on 5%, but yesterday, I'm sure you saw the drama at the National Assembly when it was, decided on for 3%. Talk to us about, 3%, and the argument is, look, the little that has been given to this region in the last couple of decades, we haven't seen much, from it. So it will make a difference if it's 3% or 10%.
Thanks, Esther. I think before answering that specific, I thought it was important also to touch on some aspects around NNPC this bill has brought up. One of the cardinal principles of the bill, when the reform process was started, was let's be clear about what the government's role is, and let's not commingle those roles. So if the government plays the role of a policymaker, there is an agency or an outfit set out to do that. The government plays the role of a regulator, there is an agency or an outfit set out to do that. And if it plays the role of a commercial player, it will play that role, and it will be a commercial player oriented to profit. And that's the basis of creating the NNPC as a limited liability company. But what I have seen in aspects of the bill is that it moves away a little from the cardinal principles of creating the NNPC as a commercial player. It does say that the NNPC should be a commercial player and should only undertake operations for profit. But there are at least three things that I see in the bill that moves away from that. One is it has introduced a principle called the supplier of last resort. And what that means is that NNPC will operate in the way it has operated recently, which is that it is the only person bringing in products into the Nigerian economy.
Okay, we're continuing our conversation on Nigeria's Petroleum Industry Bill with our special guest, Kola Karim, Chairman of Shoreline Group, Taiwo Oyedele, Partner in Africa Tax Leader at PwC Nigeria, and Adeoye Adefulu, Partner at Odujinrin and Adefulu. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time so far. Adeoye, let's pick up from where we left off with you. Sorry I had to cut in there, but just quickly complete your thoughts for us.
That's fine. So what I was saying was the principle of this supply of last resort is essentially suggesting that this uneconomic subsidy, which is, I think at your report earlier in the news segment, you have talked about the complaints about the subsidy and how it was eating into Nigeria's revenue. And that supply of last resort suggests that this will continue. And that's not a commercial way of running business. There's no business that will run on that basis. Secondly, it talks about potentially having carried interest for NNPC. Again, what you are looking for is a limited liability company that competes with its private sector competitors on a level playing field. This is not a level playing field where there's potentially a carried interest. And when you look at some of the reform work that has been done across the world, when you look at Norway, when you look at Petrobras, these companies they were working in competition with the private sector, and you could have a situation where the Petrobras or the Norwegian company, which is now, I think it's Equinor now, didn't have an interest in a joint venture just because it was not able to compete. And the third thing that I noticed was this issue of profit oil that is being given to the frontier exploration. Again, you're taking away from NNPC what really should, NNPC Limited, what should be coming to. So having dealt with NNPC Limited and those issues which move away from the cardinal principles of the PPIB, I thought it was important to, the question you asked was around the 3%, and it's 3 or 5%, so depending on which house of the National Assembly. And essentially it is 3% of annual operating expenditure, that, or 5% of annual that goes to the host communities. And in many ways, it does not replace the NDDC. It does not replace what is being done by the Ministry of Niger Delta. But what it does is provide additional funds to the community. And the difference between what was there before and what is there now is that the communities will have a lot more involvement in deciding how they want this money.
All right, Adeoye, I'm going to have to move on to Taiwo. Taiwo, now for the roles of the regulator and the Ministry of Petroleum, I know that was also a sticking point. Does this PIB address, the specific roles of each party?
Yeah, I'll say it does. So, of course, some of the initial concerns were that the PIB was going to significantly take away some of the powers of the executive and particularly the minister. But I think to a very large extent, the roles are clear. Some of the, concerns some of us will raise is, do we need two, regulators? Why don't we just have one commission and then you have maybe sub-departments to focus on upstream, and then the other one for midstream and downstream. But beyond that, the roles are fairly clear. Also for the regulators and the commission and the authority, what they need to do is also clear. There's also the provision for them to issue guidelines and regulations to actually provide the details. Like we say the devil is in the details. So how we manage the transition from the current regime to the PIB when it does become a law, as well as how the implementation is done subsequently, will be extremely important.
Absolutely.
And just to build up the point around the subsidy and the rest of it. So on one hand, you want NNPC Limited to be commercially focused, even though it's not privatized, because government will still have the equity. At some point, maybe you have to sell 30% of it. But you can't be doing under recovery that they're doing now if you are commercially focused. So what would that mean to the ordinary man on the street in terms of the price of fuel, particularly petrol? And there are also provisions there for a tax of about 1% to be imposed on fuel products for various reasons. So again, these implications have to be really modeled for government to be honest with people in terms of what to expect in the short, medium, and also long term.
All right, thank you for that, Taiwo. Kola, let me quickly come to you. We have just 3 minutes left. I really do wish we had more time, but like Taiwo said, implementation is key. Now, this is happening in the context of that global shift away from fossils. Now, but what milestones should we be looking to achieve in the next, ahead in the next few years from this bill when it's passed into law?
I think what is important is the final iteration of this bill, when signed, will then be better studied to see how the implementation can be. But what is important is the world is in a different place. Decarbonization is the mantra globally, and that does not give Nigeria any exception. So the passage of the bill is fantastic news for the industry, but importantly, it gives clarity. Very important, it gives clarity to potential investors who are looking at Nigeria as a destination for energy resource. 3, what is clear is we need to put in place the systems that will make sure the application of the PIB is set out in the bill, is operational and operated. And I only see it, we have only the next 10 years to make sure this implementation in the next 2 years is put into play, and Nigeria reaping the benefits. The next 10 years is key critical on performance and the matrix to measure performance for these entities that have been created is also a very important point that government needs to put in place.
Okay, well, I mean, generally, for the presidential assent, we know that there were some fiscal issues that were raised last time. Are we all optimistic that this time perhaps there was better engagement between both parties and that the president will assent to this bill? Taiwo.
Yeah, like I said, this is an executive bill, which means the original provisions of the bill were presented by the executive, so we don't expect them to again disagree. There haven't been significant modifications in terms of the fiscal provisions as presented in the bill as of 2020, and the final version that we expect was passed. So I'll say to that extent that I do not expect that there will be disagreement from the executive.
Okay.
If there's going to be, maybe not on the fiscal provisions.
Adeoye, are those your sentiments too?
I agree 100%. I expect that with reconciliation being done over the next week, we should see a bill passed assented to by the end of the month.